What kind of a father are you? You can't even afford a real house. My daughter Olivia's laugh, a sound I once cherished, was now a sharp, cruel thing. Her husband, Marcus, snorted mockingly as he poured himself another glass of expensive wine. Everyone at the table fell into an awkward, suffocating silence, but I just smiled. Their words cut like a surgeon's scalpel because I had given them everything I had, sacrificed my own dreams, so that they could live in the gilded cage of prosperity they now occupied. I left the restaurant in silence, their laughter a poisoned echo at my back, but a plan was already taking shape in the cold, clear space of my mind. 2 months later, I returned not as their guest, but as the owner of their entire building. The rent, I informed them, had tripled. They thought they had destroyed me that night, but they were wrong. They had only created a monster. The restaurant hummed with the clatter of expensive plates and the low, self-satisfied murmur of other people's conversations. But the air at our table was thick and heavy, like the oppressive stillness before a violent storm. The soft, ambient glow of the pendant lamps cast long, dancing shadows on the pristine white tablecloth. The rich, savory scent of grilled steak lingered in the air, though the plate in front of me sat untouched, the food now cold. Across from me, Olivia leaned forward, her designer dress shimmering in the low light, her perfectly manicured nails tapping an impatient rhythm on the delicate stem of her wine glass. Marcus, her husband, lounged beside her, his expensive blazer unbuttoned, a perpetual smirk playing on his lips as he swirled his Merlot. "You're not eating, Dad," Olivia said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What's wrong? Can't you afford the menu here?" The table, filled with a smattering of cousins, an elderly aunt, and a few of Marcus's smarmy business associates, went utterly quiet. Someone coughed nervously. A fork scraped loudly against a plate. Marcus let out a snort, a loud, deliberate sound of derision, as he refilled his wine glass to the brim. "Maybe we should have picked a cheaper place, for Daniel's sake." I felt the words like a physical slap, but I didn't flinch. I had learned to absorb their casual cruelty over the years. My hands rested on the table, the heavy silver fork in my right hand cool against my palm. I squeezed it just enough to feel the tines bite into my skin, the small, sharp pain a welcome anchor in the swirling vortex of my humiliation. Olivia's eyes, so unnervingly like her mother's, gleamed with a cold, triumphant cruelty. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous hiss that was meant for me alone. "You've never been a real father, you know that? Just a burden. Always scraping by, always embarrassing us with your simple, pathetic life." The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in. The clink of distant glasses faded, and all I could hear was the frantic, panicked drumming of my own pulse in my ears. Marcus chuckled, muttering to the man next to him, loud enough for me to hear. "Poor old Daniel. Maybe a retirement home is more his speed." A few nervous, sycophantic laughs rippled around the table, but no one would meet my eyes. I could have shouted. I could have thrown the contents of my water glass in his smug, arrogant face. I could have stood up and listed every single sacrifice I had made for them, the 2 jobs I worked to pay for Olivia's private university education, the extravagant wedding I had funded by taking out a second mortgage on my house, the seed money for their damn apartment that had wiped out my savings. But I didn't. I smiled, a tight, controlled curve of my lips that felt more like a bared teeth snarl than a gesture of amusement. "Are you finished?" I asked, my voice a low, steady rumble that seemed to surprise even myself. Olivia rolled her eyes, tossing her perfectly styled hair. "Oh, please, don't make a scene. You'll just embarrass us even more." Marcus raised his glass in a mocking toast. "To Daniel. The king of nothing." "Sit down," Olivia commanded, her voice sharp. "Don't ruin the entire night." My chair scraped harshly against the hardwood floor as I stood. The sound was a definitive, cutting shriek that sliced through the restaurant's chatter. My old, worn sweater suddenly felt heavy, but the weight of their collective stares was heavier still. I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair, the rough fabric brushing against my knuckles. It was a reminder of who I was, a man who worked with his hands, a man who built things, not this pathetic punching bag they saw. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, my eyes locking with Olivia's for a long, final moment. Hers were defiant, unyielding, and utterly devoid of love. Marcus just laughed, already turning to charm the guest beside him, having already forgotten my existence. I walked out, my steps measured and even, the restaurant's warmth giving way to the sharp, biting cold of the October night. The heavy door swung shut behind me, muffling their voices and their laughter. My breath clouded in the crisp air, and the streetlights of Columbus flickered, casting long, lonely shadows on the wet pavement. Their words echoed in my head, each one a spark, igniting a cold, hard resolve I had buried for years under a mountain of misplaced love and paternal duty. I didn't look back. My hands slipped into my pockets, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface of my phone. A plan was beginning to form, hazy at first, but sharpening at the edges, like a blade being honed on a whetstone. They thought they knew me. They thought they had broken me. They didn't know a damn thing. The streets of Columbus were quiet, the kind of profound, late-night quiet that presses in on your chest and amplifies the frantic noise in your own head. My shoes crunched on the stray, damp leaves that littered the sidewalk. The cold air stung my face, but I barely noticed. The glow of a street lamp caught a puddle of rainwater, and I stopped, staring at my warped, wavering reflection in the dark water. My phone was in my hand before I even realized I had reached for it. The screen lit up, displaying a photo of Olivia at 6 years old, a gap-toothed, joyful grin on her face, holding up a wilting daisy she had picked for me. My thumb hovered over the image, and the memories, sharp and unwelcome, came rushing back. 20 years ago, I had sat in a sterile bank office, the air thick with the smell of old ink and ambition. The loan officer's pen had scratched a relentless rhythm as I signed the papers for Olivia's college fund. My tie had felt too tight, a noose around my neck. My shoulders had ached from a double shift at the construction site, but I had smiled. She would be the first in our family to get a degree. I had seen her future then, bright, limitless, a world of possibilities I had never had. I just hadn't seen the cost to my own. The memory shifted, fast-forwarding 10 years. Olivia's wedding. The venue was a blur of white flowers, shimmering lights, and the endless clinking of champagne glasses. She had glowed in her wedding dress, a vision of beauty I had paid for by emptying my savings account. I had dreamed of traveling, of seeing the Rockies, of buying a small plot of land by a lake. But that dream had dissolved into the soft rustle of her silk veil. She had hugged me that day, her perfume sharp and sweet, a scent that now seemed cloying. "You're the best, Dad," she had said. I had believed her. 5 years ago. Marcus's first cafe. The place had smelled of fresh coffee and a slick, manufactured ambition. He had shaken my hand, his grip too tight, his promises too smooth. "This is going to change everything, Daniel. You'll see." I had handed over the last of my retirement fund to help him start it. He had called it a loan. He never mentioned it again. I blinked, and the dark street came back into focus. My small, shingled house was just ahead, a modest, unassuming thing in a row of similar homes. The porch light flickered as I climbed the worn wooden steps, the key cold in my hand. Inside, the air was stale, the old couch creaking under my weight as I sat down. A photo of Olivia sat on the bookshelf, her adult smile frozen and polished. Next to it was a stack of old papers, bills, receipts, a lifetime of reminders of what I had given up. I pulled a yellowed, cancelled check from the pile. The ink was faded but still legible. Payment for Olivia's final semester tuition, written in my own careful, blocky script. My fingers tightened around it, the old paper crumpling at the edges. She had stopped calling as often after the wedding. A generic card at Christmas, maybe a brief, obligatory call on my birthday. Marcus's cafe chain, Jones Java, had thrived, but my name was never mentioned in the glowing magazine articles they framed and hung on their walls. My contribution, my sacrifice, had been erased from their success story. The kitchen clock ticked, each second a loud, percussive blow in the silent house. I set the check down, my hand steady now. The pain was still there, a dull, persistent ache in my chest, but something else was growing alongside it. Something hard, cold, and unyielding. I looked at Olivia's photo again, her eyes bright with the promise of a future I had single-handedly built for her. My own eyes, I knew, were different now. Colder. Harder. I was not their fool anymore. Tomorrow, things would begin to change. The morning light, gray and weak, sliced through the dusty blinds of my home office, a cramped room that smelled of old coffee and forgotten projects. Papers were strewn across my desk, old contracts, invoices, a life documented in receipts. I sat with a mug of black coffee, the steam curling up into the still air, my notebook open to a fresh, clean page. Two names stared back at me, Olivia. Marcus. My pen hovered, then pressed down hard, the ink bleeding slightly into the paper. I wasn't broke. Not by their standards, perhaps, but not destitute either. Years as a construction manager had taught me to be frugal, to save, to plan. It had left me with a modest savings account and a few valuable contacts who still owed me favors. But I had lived a lean life, a simple life, pouring every spare dollar, every ounce of my energy, into them. Olivia's education. Marcus's business. Their trendy downtown apartment. My fingers tightened around the warm mug. No more. The phone rang once before Frank Miller, a grizzled, cynical real estate developer I'd known for 30 years, picked up. His voice was a gravelly rasp, the result of too many cigars and shouted arguments. Daniel? Hell, it's early. You okay? I need your advice, Frank, I said, leaning back in my chair, the old springs groaning in protest. It's about Marcus's business. A long pause. You sure about that? Stirring up trouble with your daughter's husband, that's a deep cut, my friend. They stirred first, I said, my voice flat. My pulse quickened. What do you know about his cafes? Frank sighed, a sound like gravel being poured onto concrete. He's leveraged to the hilt. Took out massive loans, made some bad deals on his leases. The word on the street is he's missed a few payments. You thinking what I think you're thinking? Maybe. I jotted a note in my book. Debts. Lenders. Who does he owe? Start with Midland Bank. There's a guy there, Tom Reed. He might talk to you. But be careful, Daniel. This could burn your bridges with Olivia for good. Let them burn, I said, and hung up, my eyes fixed on the notebook. The plan was taking shape. Rough, jagged, but real. I opened my laptop, its screen glowing harshly in the dim room. Olivia's social media was a relentless parade of curated excess. Vacations in the Caribbean. Designer handbags. Smug captions about living the dream. Marcus's posts were even worse. Pictures of him in a tailored suit, raising a glass of champagne to toast the opening of his latest cafe. I scrolled, my jaw tight. They had built their glittering empire on the foundation of my sacrifices, and then they had laughed in my face. A call to an old client, a man who supplied the kitchen equipment for Marcus's cafes, confirmed what Frank had hinted at. Marcus's business was bleeding cash. One bad month, one called-in loan, could sink him. I wrote another note. Buy the debt. It was risky, but it was possible. I still had enough capital, and enough pull with the right people, to make it work. The office felt smaller now, the walls closing in, not with despair, but with a thrilling, dangerous sense of possibility. I stood, pacing, the old floorboards creaking under my boots. My sleeves were rolled up, my coffee forgotten and cold. Each step was a decision. Each note in my book was a weapon. They had underestimated me. They had thought I would fade away quietly, a pathetic, forgotten old man. I grabbed my coat and the notebook, its pages now heavy with intent. The bank was a short drive away, and Tom Reed owed me a favor from a construction deal years ago. I stepped outside, the morning air sharp against my face, the city of Columbus waking up around me. My strides were long, purposeful. I finally knew exactly where to hit them, and I wasn't going to wait another day. I stood on the sidewalk, my notebook tucked securely in my coat pocket. The Columbus wind bit at my knuckles, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust. The bank was 10 blocks away, its glass facade glinting in the gray morning light. My strides were steady, my pulse even steadier. For the first time in years, I felt alive with purpose. Inside, the bank smelled of polished wood, old money, and a faint, cloying air freshener. Janet Hayes, an old colleague from my construction days who had moved into commercial lending, sat behind a large desk, her glasses perched low on her nose. She smiled when she saw me, a genuine, warm expression, but her eyes narrowed slightly, sensing that this was not a social call. "Daniel Cunningham," she said, leaning back in her chair. "What brings you into the lion's den?" "Information," I said, sliding into the chair opposite her. My voice was calm, but my fingers tapped against the notebook in my pocket. "About Marcus Jones and his cafe business." Janet raised an eyebrow, then turned to her computer screen. "You're not one for small talk anymore, are you?" She typed, her nails clicking softly on the keyboard. "Marcus is in deep. 3 of his primary cafe locations are behind on their loan payments. Midland is getting ready to call in the loans." She paused, her eyes meeting mine over the top of her monitor. "And you're Olivia, she's got her own mess. She took out a substantial business loan for that online boutique of hers. She's barely covering the interest payments." I nodded, jotting a note. "Debts. Vulnerable. How bad is it?" "Bad enough," Janet said. "Marcus is juggling creditors like a circus act. Olivia is worse. She's burning through cash on inventory she can't move." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Why the sudden interest, Daniel? This is all about family, isn't it?" I offered a thin, sharp smile. "Just being a curious father." "Thanks, Janet." I stood, my chair scraping softly. She didn't press, but her shrewd eyes followed me as I walked out. Next stop, Marcus's flagship cafe, a sleek, trendy spot in the heart of downtown. I pushed through the door, a small bell jangling overhead. The air smelled of burnt coffee and neglect. Half the tables were empty, and the staff seemed listless and defeated. A cracked, handwritten sign was taped over the gleaming chrome of the espresso machine, "Credit card system down. Cash only." Marcus was in the back, his voice sharp and strained as he argued on the phone. "You can't cut me off now. I'll have the money next week." His expensive shirt was wrinkled, his hair unkempt. I ordered a black coffee, paid in cash, and sat near the window, unnoticed. The cup was cold by the time I left, but my notebook was heavier. Empty seats. Angry suppliers. Cash flow crisis. Back at home, the glow of my laptop lit the dim kitchen. Olivia's social media was a gallery of manufactured excess. A photo of her in a silk scarf on a yacht. A new leather handbag slung over her shoulder. The captions screamed success, but the comments told a different story. "Where is my order? It's been 3 weeks." Her boutique was crumbling under a deluge of customer complaints. I wrote a single word: vanity. Her greatest weakness. The clock ticked past midnight. I leaned back, the chair creaking. Their pride was my opening. Their debts were my leverage. I pulled out my phone and dialed an old partner, a man who knew how to move money quietly, without leaving a trace. The line rang as the rain began to patter against the window, each drop a promise of the storm that was coming. I set the phone down, the echo of Marcus's frantic, cracking voice still in my ears. The apartment was quiet, the creak of the old floorboards loud in the stillness. My hand lingered on the receiver, the cool plastic a conduit to the chaos I had just unleashed. Then came the knock, sharp, insistent, angry. I knew who it was before I opened the door. Olivia stormed in, her designer coat flapping like a flag of war. Marcus followed, his jaw tight, reeking of stale cigarettes and desperation. The air in my small apartment shifted, growing heavy and thick with their rage. Olivia's eyes were red, her voice ablade. "You are a pathetic, old man. Stirring up trouble because you're jealous of our success. You think you can ruin our lives?" I stood by the table, my hands in my pockets, my face a carefully constructed mask of calm. "I haven't done anything," I said, my tone infuriatingly even. "It sounds to me like you're digging your own graves." Marcus paced the small room, his fists clenched, his expensive blazer hopelessly wrinkled. "Don't play innocent with us, old man," he growled. "You've been talking to someone. Banks, creditors, who knows? You are trying to sink me." His voice broke on the last word, betraying the raw fear beneath his bravado. Olivia spun toward me, her heels clicking on the worn wood floor. "You have always hated our success," she spat. "Living in this dump, clinging to your sad, little life. You are nothing, and you can't stand that we are everything you will never be." Her words were meant to cut, and they did, but I didn't flinch. I had heard far worse in that restaurant. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers. "You built your lives on my back," I said, my voice low and steady. "And now you're surprised when the ground starts to shake." Olivia laughed, a sharp, bitter sound, as she tossed her purse onto the couch. "You're delusional. Keep your little conspiracies, Dad. You are going to regret this." She turned to Marcus, who slammed his hand against the wall, the sound a sharp crack in the small room. "Back off, Daniel," he said, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Or you'll wish you had." His threat was hollow, and we both knew it. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. "Be careful, Marcus. You're not in control of this situation anymore." The words landed like stones, and his face twitched. Emily grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. She paused, glaring back at me, then slammed the door shut. The frame rattled, the sound lingering in the air like a warning. Alone, I finally exhaled. My heart was steady, but my mind was racing. Their fear was real now. Their cracks were exposed. I crossed to the table and opened my notebook, the pages worn from constant use. My pen scratched across the paper, each word a step deeper into the plan. Outside, the city lights flickered through the window, pulsing like a heartbeat. I glanced at them, my reflection a faint, determined ghost in the glass, and turned back to the page. The city lights pulsed through my window, their glow fractured by the streaks of rain. I sat at my kitchen table, the notebook open, its pages scarred with ink. My pencil scratched across a fresh page, each line a carefully considered piece of the intricate machine that would unravel their world. Olivia's venom, Marcus's hollow threats, they only sharpened my focus. This wasn't about raw anger anymore. This was about precision. I picked up the phone and dialed Ron Alastair, the old real estate partner. His voice crackled through the line, gruff and wary. "Daniel. It's late. What's this about a building?" "The one at 14th and High," I said, my tone steady. "I want to buy it. Quietly. Through a shell company." There was a long pause. "That's a big ask, my friend. An expensive one, too. Are you sure you have the capital?" "Make it happen, Ron," I said. "I'll cover it." I didn't elaborate on the source of the funds. Ron didn't need to know the why, only the how. "All right," he said finally. "But this better not blow up in your face." The line went dead. The address stared up at me from the notebook. "Their building. Their sanctuary. The next morning, I met with a lawyer named Carla Mendez in a bustling downtown cafe. Papers were spread across the table, their edges crisp under the cold light streaming through the window. Carla's pen hovered as she studied me, her eyes sharp. "This is an unusual request, Mr. Cunningham. A shell company for a single property purchase." "Discretion is paramount," I said, sliding a folder containing my financial bona fides toward her. "Can you handle it?" She nodded, flipping through the documents. "It's doable. But why the rush?" "Timing," I said, "is everything." She didn't press. By the time I left, the deal was in motion, the papers signed, my signature a quiet vow. That evening, I walked to their building, a sleek, modern tower of glass and steel in the heart of Columbus. The lobby gleamed, but I noticed a long, spiderweb crack snaking across one of the large marble tiles on the floor, an imperfection they, in their arrogance, would never notice. I told the doorman I was there to check the building's utilities, an old trick from my construction days. He waved me through without a second glance. From the street, I could see their apartment, the third-floor corner unit. Olivia's silhouette moved behind the curtain, her gestures sharp, angry. She was arguing with Marcus. I turned away, my breath visible in the chilly air. Back at home, I paused at the bookshelf. Olivia's 6-year-old face smiled out from a silver frame. My chest tightened. Was this too far? But then I remembered her cruel laugh in that restaurant, the way she had called me nothing. The guilt faded, replaced by something colder, harder. The notebook waited, its pages a map to their ruin. I opened it and wrote, "They are home. They are my leverage." The phone buzzed. A text from Carla. "Deal is moving. Papers should be ready to sign soon." I stood at the window, the city sprawling below, and saw another message. Olivia's name on the screen. My thumb hovered, but I didn't open it. Not yet. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, Olivia's message unread, its presence a satisfying spark in my chest. She was rattled, and I knew why. The formal letter from the new building management, informing all tenants that their rent would be tripling overnight, had landed that morning. I stepped out of my car, the November air sharp and cold, and headed towards Marcus's cafe. Not to enter, just to watch. The cafe was a ghost of its former self, its windows dark, a crooked, handwritten, closed sign taped to the door. I leaned against a street lamp, the metal cold through my coat. Across the street, their apartment building loomed, its lights winking like a malevolent eye. I had hired a digital marketing firm 2 days ago. A quiet, untraceable deal to aggressively boost a rival online boutique. Olivia's store was now hemorrhaging customers. Her social media pages were flooded with angry complaints, late orders, no refunds, poor quality. Her carefully constructed empire of silk and selfies was crumbling. Inside their apartment, chaos reigned. I couldn't hear their words, but I could see it all through their large, uncurtained window. Olivia, pacing frantically, her expensive blouse untucked, her hands flailing. Marcus, slumped on the sofa, a cigarette burning forgotten in his hand. A torn letter, the rent increase, lay on the coffee table. Suddenly, Olivia's phone sailed across the room, shattering against the far wall. I exhaled, my breath clouding the air. Her legendary control was slipping. Her vanity had built her brand, and now, it was the noose around her neck. I walked home, the city quiet except for the crunch of fallen leaves under my boots. In my kitchen, I pulled Olivia's photo from the drawer. Her young face, a ghost of the daughter she used to be. Guilt, a small, sharp prick, returned. She was drowning, and I was the one holding her head under the water. But then I remembered her laughter in that restaurant, the way she had called me a failure, nothing. The guilt faded, replaced by the cold, clear logic of justice. The phone rang, shattering the silence. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice, then answered, my voice smooth as glass. What is it? We need to talk, he said, his words slurred, desperate. Tomorrow. Your place. Name the time. He was breaking. And he didn't even know I was the one holding the hammer. I leaned back in my chair. 8 o'clock. Don't be late. I hung up. A clap of thunder rolled in the distance. The storm was coming, and they were caught directly in its path. I folded the lawyer's letter, its words, property transfer complete, heavy in my hands. Lightning cracked outside, splitting the Columbus sky, but inside, I felt steady, rooted. My coat was damp from the storm as I left my apartment, the full set of documents tucked into my briefcase, each page a blade honed for this final moment. Their building waited, a tower of glass and lies, and I was ready to bring it down. The elevator hummed as I rode to their floor, the mirrored walls reflecting my face, calm, unyielding. Their apartment door was ajar, their raised voices spilling out into the hallway, sharp and frantic. I knocked once, a hard, decisive rap. The voices stopped. Marcus yanked the door open, his shirt untucked, his eyes wild. Daniel, he said, his voice breaking. What the hell are you doing here? I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. The apartment was a wreck. Half-packed boxes, scattered wine glasses, the torn rent notice pinned to a stack of newspapers. Olivia stood by the window, her hair a mess, her silk blouse stained with tears. Dad, she whispered, her voice as small as a child's. I set the documents on the coffee table, the thud loud in the tense silence. Read these, I said, my tone flat. Olivia reached for them, her hands trembling. Her eyes widened as she scanned the pages. Marcus leaned over her shoulder, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his face draining of all color. You own the building? Olivia's voice cracked, her gaze darting to me. This has to be a mistake. No mistake, I said, crossing my arms. I bought it. Your rent is due. All of it. Now. Marcus lunged forward, his fists clenched. You can't do this. We'll fight it, you hear me? But his voice faltered, his bravado crumbling into ash. He knew he had nothing left. No cafes, no leverage, no charm to save him. Olivia sank onto the couch, sobbing. Dad, please, she said, her words choked. I didn't mean it. Those things I said at the restaurant. Remember when you taught me to ride a bike? You were my hero. Her tears, her desperate grasp at a shared, happy memory, didn't reach me. Not anymore. You called me nothing, I said, my voice low and steady. You both did. You built your lives on the foundation I gave you, and then you spat on it. This, I gestured to the documents, is the consequence of your choices. Marcus grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly weak. We'll fix it, Daniel. Give us time. We'll pay you back, I swear. His eyes begged, but all I saw was the man who had mocked me, who had laughed as I bled. I pulled my arm free. You're out of time. I turned to the door, their pleas following me like desperate, fading echoes. In the elevator, the mirrored walls closed in, and for a fleeting moment, a sliver of doubt flickered. Olivia's tears, her voice calling me, Dad. I pressed it down, my jaw tight. They had made their bed. Outside, the wind howled. I pulled out my phone and typed a note, fund for the overlooked. The idea had been growing in my mind for weeks, a way to use my resources to help those like me, those who had given everything and received only scorn in return. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, my steps firm on the wet pavement, and headed out into the night. I sank into the chair at my kitchen table, the scent of fresh coffee curling from the mug in my hands. The storm had passed, leaving behind a profound quiet that settled deep in my bones. For the first time in years, I felt still, like a river that has finally found its course. My notebook lay open. I wrote, "The foundation for the sacrificed. For those who give their all and are forgotten." The words felt right, a purpose born from the ashes of my pain. I dialed Frank Miller. "Daniel," he said, his familiar rasp answering on the second ring. "You sound different. What's going on?" "I did it, Frank," I said, leaning back in my chair. "They're done. And now, I'm starting something new. A foundation for people like me. People who gave everything and got nothing but grief in return." Frank let out a low whistle. "Hell, you don't mess around. You really pulled it off." His voice held a note of awe that warmed me like sunlight after a long, hard winter. "I had to," I said. "For me. And for others." We talked details, structure, goals. By the time I hung up, the idea was solid, a beacon in the fog of what I had done. The next day, I walked into a small office I had rented downtown, its windows bright with morning light. The air smelled of fresh paper and possibility. A consultant named Sarah sat across from me, her laptop open. "Your foundation is viable," she said, sliding a budget across the desk. "We can launch within a month." I nodded, signing the first set of forms, my pen steady. "Let's make it happen." As I left, a memory surfaced. Years ago, standing in a bank, signing away my savings for Olivia's wedding. I had dreamed of the Rockies then, of open skies and freedom. I had let that dream go for her. Now, I was finally free. That evening, I wandered through a park near my new, smaller apartment. Children laughed on a playground, their parents watching with quiet pride. My foundation, I realized, would matter to someone's father, to someone's mother, to someone's sacrifice. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about redemption. Back at home, the mailbox rattled. I pulled out a single envelope. Olivia's handwriting. My fingers traced the familiar ink, but I didn't tear it open. I tucked it into a drawer, next to old photos and faded checks. That chapter was closed. The next morning, I stood in a bright community center, the air warm with the scent of coffee and new beginnings. It was the first meeting for my foundation. Dozens of faces, some weary, some hopeful, looked up at me. I stepped to the podium, my voice steady. "This is for the overlooked," I said. "For those who gave their all and were pushed aside. We see you. We are here for you." The applause roared, and I felt it in my chest. A purpose. A legacy. I left the center as dusk fell, the city alive with the sounds of horns and laughter. The street stretched before me, lined with trees that were bare from winter's touch. I walked, my hands in my pockets, a quiet smile on my lips. Olivia and Marcus were out there somewhere, rebuilding or breaking, but their story was no longer entangled with mine. Their future was their own to carry. The wind picked up, cool against my face, and I tilted my head to the sky. The stars were faint, but they were there, steady above the city's glow. My steps echoed, each one a note in a song I was finally writing for myself.